Today on The Well, Dr. Swanson helps us understand the importance of knowing the full measure of God's nature.
At some point, every single one of us on this planet is going to get all of God.
And in our Living Water segment, Michael W. Smith shares his story of transformation when he finally realized God was the one in charge.
One of the questions that we're asked many times in life is the question, how much do you want? You know, I come home from work sometimes and I find my wife making dinner and she'll ask me, how much do you want? And not long ago, I was thinking about that question in regard to my relationship with God. And sometimes I'll meet people and they seem to have such a hunger and a desire to know God and to know more of God. Sometimes it makes me feel guilty or maybe a little embarrassed because I don't seem to want as much of God as they have. So I want to ask you today, how much God do you want? You know, I think all of us in our minds, we have sort of like a God gauge, you know, where there's a little line that says we're full, where we think we've had enough of God or we have as much of God as we want. And, you know, maybe you run into people and they seem to talk about God a lot, or they mention Jesus, or how much they pray, or maybe they want to go to a third world country of all things. And in our mind, we look at them and we say, well, they've got a little too much. You know, they've gone a little overboard with this whole Christian thing. And it's interesting to me sometimes how we want to be Christian, but we want to do so in a socially acceptable way. We don't want anyone to think we're weird or abnormal or out of place. I mean, I don't want to be called a Bible thumper or a Jesus freak of some kind. So it's interesting for us to answer that question, how much God do we want? And when we look at our culture today, there are some people, when they answer that question, they say, none. I don't want any. Actually, sociologists have developed a category of people in our country, and they're called the nones, N-O-N-E-S. And this is a group of people who, when given a form or an application, and it asks them to check religious affiliation, they check the box that says none. They're not interested in having anything to do with God or having any measure of faith. And what's alarming to me is that now represents 20% of our nation's population. That's 46 million people, and it's 35% of people in their 20s say none. Now, there are still other people who would say, you know, I want as much of God as I can have that's free. You know, I want as much security and hope and love and the promise that I'll go to heaven as long as it doesn't cost me anything, as long as I still can do what I want to do and think what I want to think and go where I want to go and hang with the same people that I want to be with, as long as it doesn't make me change, as long as it doesn't cost me anything, as long as God is free, well, I'll have as much of God as I can have at that level. And then we know other people, and these people go all in. I mean, they push their chips to the center of the table, and they say, we're 100% committed, and they do crazy things like, I'm going to move to Haiti, quit my job in the United States, and I'm going to go set up a business in a third world country because I want to bring economic justice and social change to a country like Haiti. We had somebody in our church who did that. Or we hear people say, well, I'm going to give away 90% of what I make, and I'm going to keep 10. And you say, okay, those people are all in. Well, I think most of us probably live between the people who say, I want as much as I can have that's free, and between that and people who say, I'm all in. It's somewhere in the middle. You know, we're kind of like the guy who, his name is Wilbur Reese, and he rather famously said, I think I'll have $3 worth of God, please. Not enough to explode my mind or change my life, but, you know, enough so I can be secure about things. He said, I'd like to have a pound of God in a paper sack. And as I look at our world today, that's really what I see happening. We want to have a God who sort of conforms to us. We want to have a God that we can carry around, who's portable, who is easily told what to do and when to do it. And we move along that path quite comfortably, actually, until something happens to explode that illusion or that myth in our lives. And suddenly something happens to us and we realize we're not in control. A prophet like Nahum comes and gets in our face and demands that we consider the full breadth of the nature and the character of God. And that's really what I want to talk to you about today, because no matter how you would say, you would answer that question today. How much God do you want? Here's the truth. At some point, every single one of us on this planet is going to get all of God.